Helen has reminded me it's her turn. I almost forgot. Please come. On our minds, and I won't say in our hearts, but certainly very much on our minds, as we consider the implications of Islam not only to the Middle East but to the wider world as well. And so, as we heard last week, it's an issue that we really need to take seriously. And Tsvi is going to come and share with us on Ishmael and Isaac from his perspective. And I think it should be a very informative sharing time. As you know, we're going to be recording it, and we'll be making tapes available to everyone. So Tsvi, please come. I'd like to pray with you. Okay, let's pray. Father, once again, we want to open our hearts to hear what your servant has to share with us today. Thank you, Father, for your anointing upon him and his life. Father, open our ears to hear what your Spirit is speaking through him to us today. Just bless him, Lord, as he ministers truth and life to us. We thank you for his time with us now. We commit it into your hands. We ask it all in Yeshua's name. Amen.
I don't know how many of you were last week. All of you? All of you. All right, so it gives me some basis to start with. So last week, Yaron, we're talking to you about some of the features of Islam and how it translates into the political arena, I think. What I want to try to explain, illuminate, is what are the spiritual reasons for the Islamic phenomena, if you want. Because I think one of the things that no one is willing to talk about is that the fact of the matter is that the conflict that we have here in the Middle East is fundamentally religious conflict. And you will not hear political leaders speak about it because they are too frightful. They are too afraid to speak about it. But nonetheless, in my conviction, I think that the root and the cause are religious collision between two approaches. And I will try to explain what I mean by that. But I want to start with, first to remind us that the Israeli-Arab struggle did not start at 1967 in Six-Day War, but actually began with the first Jewish immigrations that began to come here into Palestine, what it was used to be called, in 1882 and even prior to that. So we can begin to see conflicts as soon as there are enough Jewish people to pose a problem in the mind of the Arab people here who live here. And I will not go into any kind of survey how many people live here. It's not the place, although it is very important. So first I want to be able to establish the link between Ishmael and the Muslim world. This is very important for my thesis. So first of all, I want to touch about the birthplace of Islam, which I think is no coincidence. The birthplace of Islam was originated in the territory inherited by Ishmael. I want to remind you Genesis 25:18 that defines the geographical limits of the descendants of Ishmael. And it says there that they settled from Havilah to Shur, which is opposite to Egypt, into the direction of Assyria, which means from the northern part of Egypt all the way to Assyria, which includes the Saudi Arabia peninsula. Now, this is from the biblical perspective where the descendants of Ishmael went and dispersed. It is interesting to note that the Quran claims the same thing. And I want to emphasize here a simple fact, but needs to be reminded. We live in a world that does not consider religious things or does not take religious things seriously. However, millions upon millions of people do. And they conduct their behavior according to their religious convictions. You see? So it doesn't matter whether the politicians or the secular people say that it does not matter. when millions upon millions of people conduct their lives according to their religious convictions. And they do, and we have to recognize it. So even if we don't talk about it, it doesn't mean that it's not there. Or even if we disagree with it, it doesn't mean that it's not there. It's there, and it's our task to recognize it. So, the birthplace of Islam, the Quran recognizes the Saudi Peninsula as the center and Mecca as its very core, thus removing, or they are doing two things, the Muslims. First of all, and I will talk about it a little bit, they do two things. They give the promise to Ishmael, and therefore the land as well, which is the following promise, right? The promised seed is given the promised land. It is linked, it is go hand by hand. And it is not surprising that Surah, I'm quoting you from the Quran, from Surah 2, verse 125. It says like this: remember we remember with the Muslims, we made the house, the Kaaba. You know the Kaaba, the house, the place in Mecca where the black stone where everybody goes there and worship. Remember we made the house a place of assembly for men, and take ye the station of Abraham as a place of prayer. And we covenanted with Abraham and Ismail, that is Ishmael, that they should sanctify my house. See what is happening here? Instead of Abraham going to Mount Moriah, he's going with Ishmael to Mecca. And so the house of God is no longer where Isaac was offered by Abraham to God, but it is Mecca, where Abraham and Ishmael prayed to God together. See how the story goes. So what I want to emphasize here in the surah, which in my opinion mobilized the whole conflict here, is the question of inheritance. Is the question of who has the right to the promise. Okay? So Ishmael has the right to the promise, and the promise is, as far as Islam is concerned, the territory. I think Yaron was talking to you about it. The land. Now, of course, Islam took the land further and claims that the whole world is Islamic territory. But that's beside the point. But the very idea of a sanctified land, mind you, there is no other religion as we know of, that sanctifies a territory as given by decree of God. It's a fundamentally Jewish or biblical idea. And therefore we find it in Islam. It's not something that we take for granted. A land given by promise, as a promise by God. We have to think about this. So the heir, then, Ishmael, we have to understand, is from which the promised one will come. It has to be this way. If the Jews and the Christians accept the Messiah, the Redeemer, to come from the promised seed, so are the Muslims. But the promised seed is no longer Isaac, is Ishmael, and therefore their Islamic religion is looking forward to a different kind of Redeemer, which of course, in my opinion, is Muhammad. And by the way, I haven't heard many, I don't claim to be an Orientalist, but I do think that there are a lot of parallels between Muhammad and the Messiah. Although Muhammad is not called the Messiah, he's only the messenger. Yeah? But the way you are relating to Muhammad is very much like we are relating to Jesus. If you only heard the latest incident in Nigeria, where there is a death sentence on a journalist, that all she said was that Muhammad was happy to marry one of these beauty contests, and there is a sentence of death. Why? Because Muhammad is not only a messenger, he's far greater than that, and his ascension to heaven and all of that. I did not hear many Orientalists speak about it. My guess is that because they're not very familiar with the religious comparison between Jews, Arabs, and the Islamic, the nuances. That's at least my opinion. Now I want to say again that this ancient rivalry between the two potential heirs are already mentioned in Genesis. The struggle with Sarah and Hagar, and where Sarah says specifically, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, which is accepted by God. In other words, there is only one heir, not two. And so the conflict there begins, and we find it in the struggle between Isaac and Esau and so forth. Okay, so I'm saying that fundamentally the struggle between the Arabs and the Jews is a religious one, and it is over the inheritance. Who has the right to inherit? Who is inheriting the promise? Now, in my opinion, again, I think that this question is just another way to say anti-Semitism. And you have to realize that, at least the way I understand it, anti-Semitism is the attempt to disinherit the Jews. That's all there is to it. When you peel everything out, this is what you remain with. You know, the Jews are no longer relevant. Now, what I think is very interesting is, first of all, that Islam did not invent anti-Semitism. It learned it from the Christian world. And the funny thing is that now we find both Muslim extremists and Christian extremists collaborating against Israel, and I will explain it in a minute. The new Israel idea that Christianity took to the extreme as to disinherit Israel is what I think anti-Semitism, or if you want, gave rise to anti-Semitism. Now, the reason it was not developed, anti-Semitism was not developed in the Islamic world, is simply because the Jews were not a problem for the Muslims. They were insignificant in numbers. They were not in any ways a threat to the regimes, and so they maintained relatively peaceful, and I'm saying relatively because there is a myth today which says that the Jews did not suffer under the Muslims, but they did, and they did greatly. Maybe in comparison to the persecutions they had under the Christians, they suffered minorly, but nevertheless they suffered. And by the way, Christians and Jews in the Muslim world suffer the same. The Muslims don't see distinction between the two. For them, it's one and the same. This is why I'm saying again and again to my Arab Christian friends, and there are not too many of them, that they should be aware of the Muslims and not be so quick to join hands with them, because they will be the first one to suffer. But as I said, since the Jews begin to be numerable in this land, we begin also to find the first clearly anti-Semitic things that happened, first of all, in Syria, in what is known the Damascus blood libel in 1840, where a priest and his Muslim helper were murdered, and the Jews were blamed in a typical fashion of the blood libel. And this is significant because in this year there was a wave of immigration to Israel from Eastern Europe. And so we find it, and there is no question in my mind that the blood libel of Damascus was influenced by the blood libels that were continually happened in the Eastern blood libel that were happening in Eastern Europe. And so anti-Semitism is only on the rise ever since. Now, in May this year, Saleh Shhadeh, who was the commander of Ezadim el-Qassam are you familiar with these terms a little bit? Azadim al-Qassam is one of the terrorist groups of the Hamas, and he was the commander in Gaza. He was killed by the Israelis about 2-3 months ago. I think was in an interview summed up the motivation behind the suicide bombing, and in my opinion, by thus exposing them as anti-Semitic at core, although without identifying them as such. And I'm saying what Shhadeh is telling the interviewer. A candidate for a suicide is a person who has a religious conviction. Yeah? And the cause is to free the Arab land from the hand of the Jews. Our motto is we are not fighting the Jews because of their religion, but because they took away our land. He contradicts himself because one is connected with the other. The Jews will not claim the land if there were no Jews. So although he's trying to avoid the claim of being an anti-Semite, he's an anti-Semite nonetheless, and we have to recognize it. The Jews would not be here in this land if they were not Jews to begin with. You realize that, of course, and he realized it as well. Now it is interesting that along with people like Shchade, comes the Christian world, who in the Durban conference of the UN Durban Conference for Human Rights, the non-government organizations, about 3,000 of them, came up with a statement. Now I think it is important for us to realize that these are non-governmental organizations because they are not bound by political agenda or slogans. They can be, they're freer to express their opinion in any way they like because they are not under any government and they don't have to consider political alliances and who knows what. And this is what they said, that Israel is a racist apartheid state, and guilty of war crimes, acts of genocide, and ethnic cleansing. This is what this Christian organization said about Israel just last year. So again, the problem of the conflict in the Middle East, or the cause of the problem in the Middle East, is no longer anything else but the Jewish people. Their presence, their behavior, whatever is happening here is because of the Jews. All right? And the the Church of Scotland's journal, Life and Work, said so specifically, It says that to create a new state, Palestine, with just and viable borders, and East Jerusalem as its capital, and one of the festering sores of our modern world will begin the long process of healing and renewal. See what I'm saying here? What this man is saying? He's saying that once the Jews are agreeing to the Palestinian demands, the world process of healing will begin to its process. The world, not the Middle East. The Jew is the pain in the butt, so to speak, of the world. And the French ambassador said it specifically. He said that that little shitty little country, he said, is the cause of our problem. Observing these trends in the Muslim world, Yehuda Bauer, who is one of the foremost scholars of the Holocaust, said that the Muslim world of today resembles Europe of 1930s. It's a very enlightening observation. Now I think this will be enough to just establish that the real issue here is the whole idea of replacement theology. Whether it is going to be a Christian or a Muslim, it always ends up in anti-Semitism. It doesn't matter which side of humanity it comes from. But here I want to move on and say that both in regards to the Promised Land, both the Arabs and the Christians, if you like, although it is not my emphasis, the Arabs and the Jews are facing moral dilemma which they will have to deal with. Because after all, if we're talking about religious struggle here, we have to consider God in it, and where God is in relationship to the Jews and to the Arabs. Okay? It is not enough to say the Arabs are all bad and the Jews are all good, or vice versa, they're all bad. We have to find out, or at least attempt to see how God is viewing the struggle. So I want first to highlight what, to my mind, although to the Arabs it's for sure it's not a dilemma, it's not a moral dilemma, but in God's view, the Arabs' moral dilemma is the ability to come to terms with God's word. Now I want to quote Rashi. Rashi is a Middle Ages Jewish interpreter, a very famous one and a very important one. And he's trying to deal with the question of why Genesis begin with Genesis chapter 1. In his opinion, the Bible should have begun with Exodus chapter 12. Why Exodus chapter 12? Because this is the first commandment given by God to the Israelites in Sinai. So in his logic, this is where the Bible should have begun, but it's not. It's telling a story that seems to be irrelevant at first sight. God created the world and animals. Who cares? Think about it. And this is his explanation. What is the reason for beginning with in the beginning? Because he had made known to his people the power of his works in giving them the heritage of the nations. And he quotes Psalms 111:6. So that if the nations would accuse Israel, saying, listen to this, you are robbers, you have conquered the lands of 7 nations, they, that is Israel, would tell them that the whole earth belongs to God. He created it, and he gave it to whom he pleased. By his will he gave it to them, and by his will he took it from them and gave it to us. See? So Rashi is saying, I acknowledge the fact that this land was belonging to other people. But God decided that this is going to be our land, and I'm not questioning God. In other words, Rashi is not trying to supply a moral explanation to why the Jews are here, or why Israel is living here. All he's saying is that this is the will of God. And who are we to argue with it? He gave it to the nations, he took it away from the nations, he gave it to Israel, and at times he took it away from Israel as well. So what Rashi is saying basically, that if human and divine morality seem to conflict, divine morality take precedence. This is very important, because the divine will is by definition perfectly moral. By definition, perfectly moral. So theoretically, the claim over the question whose is the land should be settled. But it is not. And so the Muslims' claim of the land is therefore, as far as I believe, not as far as they believe, in opposition to the divine decree, and therefore immoral by definition. We have to realize that. It's not a question of political agendas. It's a political of sin and righteousness. It's as simple as that. So the Muslims will have to face up with this moral dilemma sooner or later. Even if they refuse to recognize it, they will have to recognize it in one day. Which leads me to say a few words about Isaac, or the Jewish dilemma. What is the Jewish moral dilemma? My suggestion to you is that it is very similar, although in somewhat different terms. One of the major setbacks that happened to the Israelites in the desert was the reports of the 10 tribes, which caused them to wander another 40 years in the desert. And the spies, as we understand, lacked faith, right? But we have to question, we have to ask, why did they lack faith, and faith in what? Faith in what? Didn't they see God operating in the desert in great wonders and miracles? So lacked faith in what? I would suggest to you the explanation of Immanuel Levinas. If you're not familiar with Immanuel Levinas, I suggest that you'll get yourself familiar with him. He's dead by now, but he's outstanding philosopher, a French philosopher, which in my opinion is going to be recognized in a few years to be one of the greatest philosophers of the century. And he says, and this is what he says about the spies' complaint. I mean, the spies' complaint was, they're too strong for us. That was their lack of faith. And he says, the right of indigenous people to exist takes precedence over the moral right of the universal God. This is their lack of faith. In other words, they questions the morality of God himself. They say even the house owner cannot take from them the tools he deposited in their hand. This is what he says toward the end. I just want to move on. The purity of the spies. This is what he says. The purity of the spies. Their aesthetic purity went too far. Sounds contradictionary, but it is not. And he says their set of moralities, so they thought, were so superior that they were better than God's. This was their lack of faith in God's set of moralities. And I think he's correct. And I'm saying that this is the attitude of the atheists and the moral supremacists of our day, who with good intentions destroy everything. You know, we have to realize that. And what is more important to realize is that the spies' behavior brought disrepute upon Israel. I mean, this is not an internal question only, but it is a question that involves the whole world. And here is what I'm saying. Any moral standards that Israel may have devised apart from God would always be perceived by the nations as immoral, and rightly so. See, Israel, look at the news today. Israel always tried to convince the world that the Israelis are more moral, they take care of the children, the enemies, they don't do anything that is unnecessary, yet Israel is perceived as a nation who commits war crimes. Why? Because I think that Israel setting a set of morals that are apart from God. And therefore the world even unknowingly cannot accept it and blames Israel for atrocities. So it does not matter how hard Israel will try to convince that it is better than any other nation. It will not fly because Israel is singled out for different set of moralities. Israel is singled out. The world, although secular as it may come, refuses to compromise with Israel on these issues. It is amazing. Think about it for a minute. Why the world is keep on blaming Israel for things they wouldn't even think of blaming any other nation in the world, let alone the Palestinians. It is illogical. It makes no sense. It has no good explanation apart from the reason that I gave you here, that the world, by God's Spirit, is driven to this position, to take this position. And I don't even realize it. So, Israel's right to exist in the land of Canaan rests solely upon the Word of God. Any other claim, such as nationality, the Jews' willing desire to solve the Jewish problem, are all good and nice, but they cannot stand. They cannot stand against the claim of the indigenous people to live here. See what I'm saying here? If Israel is insisting upon adopting worldly standards for its existence, it bounds to fail. That's the moral dilemma of Israel, or if you like, the Jews. If the Jews, so long as the Jews will refuse to take God's set of moralities, they will fail in whatever they do. And you as Christians who love Israel have to realize it, as well as I am, as a Jew, needs to realize it. It is not a question of perfect justice. It is not a question of how many Palestinians the Israelis are killed in comparison to the Palestinians and so on and so forth. How many civilians? What are the borders? None of it will settle until Israel will come to terms with its own moral dilemma, not with the Palestinians, but with God. See? Because as I said, the conflict here is fundamentally religious. And therefore, if we are unable to come to terms with who God is, the conflict cannot be resolved. So here I come to the solution that I'm proposing, but I guess no one will listen except you, be quite frank. See, because of the problem, both the Arabs and the Jews will have to be judged by God according to their own deeds. See, I believe that if we will see Israel's willing to withdraw, or Israel is already willing, but if Israel will withdraw from the territory, think about it, because biblically it's a form of exile. See, and exile comes upon the Jews only when they rebel against God. But the promised land is not Tel Aviv, although that is too, but primarily is the area around Jerusalem. Judea and Samaria, which are Palestinian, recognized Palestinian territories by the international community. There is no question about it. But that does not matter. If Israel will withdraw from these places which were given to them in 1967, you know how many soldiers died in the war of 1967? 600. In 3 fronts. If I may say so, it's a negligible number. It's nothing. Although for the families it's a great cost. Nothing. It was given to the Israelis. They didn't have to fight for it. And it will be taken away from them so long as they will rebel against God. So if I view it in this manner, the Palestinians are the wrath of God upon Israel. Nothing more, nothing less. They're a menace sent to Israel by God to push them into repentance. This is difficult because the Israelis are suffering. This is not a light thing. But already in Lebanon, and I've been saying this is nothing new for me. I've been saying it since 1982 when I was a soldier in Lebanon. And I saw how the Israelis are fighting. And I said, this cannot be. Something is wrong here. Something is wrong with the Israelis. They don't know how to fight. They cannot fight. They lose battles over nothing. And when the Israelis withdrew from Lebanon, they did not withdraw. They ran away. And they ran away by how many people? How many Hezbollah warriors were there when the Israelis fled from Lebanon? You have any idea? Take a guess. 600, 1,000, maybe. Let's say 1,000, be generous. 1,000 men kicked Israel out of Lebanon almost without a fight. If this is not a form of a curse that God said through Moses in Deuteronomy, then I don't know what it is, because there is no rational explanation for Israel's behavior. You see? So Israel's defeat in Lebanon, and we have to call it for what it is, Israel's defeat in Lebanon was caused by 1,000 people. And Israel is afraid, now there are 2,000. Israel is so much afraid from these people that they will not take the risk of attacking these people for fear of what may happen. They're afraid. The Israelis are afraid. It's as simple as that. And the Israelis are afraid from the international community, and Israel is afraid from the Palestinians, and Israelis are afraid. They have atomic weapon at their disposal, and they're afraid. They have the best arsenal in the world, and they're still afraid. There is no rational explanation for it, other than something spiritual is taking place here. And so I think that, it is amazing, in my mind, that the American president, in a time of crisis, can call upon his people to pray for the nation. Even if he's a secular, there is room for him to do that. The nation allows it to happen. In Israel, no one will dare do that. Sharon will never call the nation of Israel to pray to God. It's not even in his mind. He doesn't even think along these terms, along the line of these kind of terms. He does not seek God. And until Israel will come to this place, Israel will continue to suffer from a variety of different things. Israel is not only suffering the problem of terror, although this is the most crucial problem right now, but Israel suffers water crisis, crop crisis, pollution crisis. You name it, it's here. Big time. I was just talking to a friend of mine who is responsible for all the water system of the southern part of Israel, the Judea desert. He's working in the Israel Water Authority. And he described to me how dangerous and pathetic the water situation in this part of the land. And you know what he told me? He told me something that I never knew. He said that the worst pollutant of water today in Israel is the army. Not the Palestinians, not factories, not any other kind of industries, but the army. The army dumps its garbage everywhere. It doesn't care for nothing, and no one can tell nobody a thing about it. And he said that the water reservoirs of Israel is just getting worse by the month, and it's critical. It's not just a theoretical. He said that they drilled a well somewhere in the area of Hebron, and I literally pumped out sewers water out of the well. So, in my opinion, and I think when we read the Bible, it's too obvious for us. We don't need to go into any places. Until Israel will come to a place where they begin to seek God, relief will not come. That's the solution. There is no political solution for what we're facing here. And I'm telling you, I heard an interesting lecture by two extremists of left and right, and Eliakim Ha'etzni. I don't know if you're familiar with his name. Are you familiar with Eliakim Ha'etzni? Eliakim Ha'etzni is the ideologist of Gush Emunim. He lives in Hebron. And he says the moment Israel forces a solution upon the Jews, not upon the Arabs, there's going to be a civil war here. And he said so publicly. He said, beware. Know that if the Jews will force their solution upon other Jews, there's going to be a civil war. So you see, it's not only the Palestinians, it's the Jews as well. And Ariel Sharon, who was the who was against the Palestinian state, now is for it. So what is the difference between Sharon and Mitzna, for that matter? Politically, wherever you go, there is a dead end. There is a gridlock. Israel cannot operate politically, and Israel cannot operate militarily. Its hands are tied by the national community and by the public opinion within inside Israel. They cannot resolve it. For 30 years, Israelis cannot resolve this problem. They're not going to be able to resolve it when Mitzna is going to come to reign. If he's going to do it, his destiny is going to be like that of Rabin. And he knows it. These are not empty threats by Jews. And civil war is not a theoretical option. It is real. And it happened in the past as well. So, situation seems to be bleak, without hope. And it is so without God. Without God, it is bleak. And there is no wonder why people are going into desperation, leaving the country if they can, or living in what some call internal exile. You know what internal exile? They live in Israel, but their mind is somewhere else. They don't care. They detach themselves from whatever is happening here. They took themselves into mental exile. And the Jews will have to come to terms with their God once again for salvation to come. And it will come, be sure of that. That's our hope. Our hope in things cannot be seen, but promised. And I think this is where the Christian community becomes so vital. One of the things that Israel failed to realize, that the Christian community of today is not the Christian community of 60 years ago. It went a transformation in its relationship to the Jewish people. And instead of being the Jewish worst enemies, the devout Christians became the Jews' best enemies. And although the Jews don't realize it, the Christians do. And if they do, it becomes their responsibility to pray to God for Israel's behalf, as well as the Palestinians. Just as we Jews who believe in Jesus have to do. Once realizing it, we have to do our utmost to convince people, the Jewish people, whether by prayer or by deeds or by whatever God leads you to do, to reconcile the Jew with his God. That's going to be the solution. Sounds unrealistic, sounds almost a type of madness, if you like, in our world. But this is the only solution. This is the only solution. There's not going to be any other. And put our hope in any other thing. I see many believers. Political parties' ideologies will be irrelevant, as it is irrelevant today, because the bottom line is that what dictates everything is reality, not ideologies. Ideologies do not dictate what is happening here, but reality. And reality is driven by forces unseen by us. And so I hope I did not despair you, but I encouraged you to be more courageous and bolder in your approach, knowing that the God of Israel still works today. So with this, I'm concluding my lecture. If you have questions, I'm here to answer if I can.
One of the things, I told you my wife and I were here 2 months, but one of the things that we picked up that CFI wants to do is to urge the Jewish people in their personal faith in God.
Yeah.
And building, in particular the new immigrants that we work with, urging them, encouraging them to have a personal relationship with God. Is that the kind of thing you were talking about at the end? Particularly people coming out of the soul business.
Yeah.
They did not pray, they did not have Bibles, many of them.
Yeah.
They don't know anything about it.
Yeah, I think it's a good approach. Although if you tell a Jew to have a personal relationship with God, he doesn't understand what you're talking about. Yeah, trust in God, faith in God, go back to his religion or whatever, because this follows what Jesus says. If they believed in Moses, they would have believed in me. This is very important. It's not the other way around. Listen to this. If you want to believe in Jesus, you must first believe in Moses, because Moses spoke of him. You cannot know anything about Jesus without Moses. It's not the other way around. And Jesus, as much as it sounds strange to your ears, maybe, Jesus draws his validity from Moses. This is why he said, if you believed in Moses, you would have believed of me, because he spoke about me. So if you encourage Jews to go back to Moses, they will find Jesus. Any other question? Or are you too tired? Yeah. I was born here in Israel. I became a believer in 1980 here in Israel, and I'm in ministry ever since, basically. And what I do today is I publish. I brought a sample of. I published Kivun. I don't know if you saw it. Kivun is the only Hebrew magazine for the Messianic believers here, for adults, that is. And I also do a lot of Bible teachings and lectures. And I also work on my PhD in a Hebrew University on Jesus and Zionism. That's my topic of research. And on top of it, I translate. I'm writing a Greek-Hebrew dictionary to the New Testament, which is not it's a book that is not existing in Hebrew. It's going to be the first of its kind. So this is what I do. And I live in Ma'ale Adumim. I have 3 children and a wife, of course. You need a wife to have children. Well, they're getting there. They're not there yet. My oldest son is 17, so next year he's going to go to the army, and I have a daughter 15 and another daughter is 10 years old. It's a long story. I'm not sure I want to get into it, but it changed my life. It's the basic. There's no contradiction. I didn't say that there is a contradiction between them. Jerusalem, by the way, was a non-factor. The place of Jerusalem in the Muslim world is a modern phenomenon. It wasn't like that in the past. They didn't care for Jerusalem. I mean, Salah ad-Din built the mosque, or Omar built the mosques on Mount Moriah, because that was the general practice. The Christians did it, the Muslims did it. Whenever there was a holy site, they built their own holy site, and by doing so claimed it as theirs. There was no more, no less. They didn't recognize anything extraordinary in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, even if you look at pictures of recent pictures, 19th centuries and so on, Jerusalem is just a neglected town. It is not an important place, and was never so until the Israeli-Arab conflict began to take a serious direction. So we have to think about it. Jerusalem is not mentioned in the Quran. Not even once. And Arabs, by the way, many of them don't know the issues. They don't read the Quran. They don't know. They don't know. They rely upon what their leaders tell them. And if their leaders tell them Jerusalem is such, so Jerusalem is such. They don't question. They don't have the mentality and the attitude of Western civilization, where people have doubt and they question and they search and they want to find out for themselves. This is nothing. This is not the mentality of the Muslims. If their religious leader authority tells them that it is so, it is so. That's it. That's enough. Yeah. I said what was behind it is the struggle over inheritance. Whose promise is it, the Jews or the Christians? This is why the Crusaders came here to begin with. It was their promised land, not the Jews. And the people who inhabited this part of the world learned from them. What did they know? They didn't know. Well, it's putting too much blame on the Christians. I don't want to do that. I mean, basically, it's the Muslims' responsibility for whatever they do. Okay, and the Muslims hates the Jews and the Christians in the same way. For them, there is no the distinction is of nuances. It is not something of substantial difference. This is why they treat in the Muslim world they have the class of what they call the dhimmi. The dhimmi are the people who are not Muslims and are designated they have a special set of laws for these people. They're second class. They have to wear special clothes. That the Christians in the Muslim world, just like the Jews, had to wear distinct hats and clothings. The yellow badge is not a Nazi invention, it's a Muslim invention. And both Jews and Christians were obligated to wear it. And they both had the same legal status in the eyes of the Muslim ruler. So to say that the Muslims do what they do because of the Christians, that's pushing it, too much. So the Muslims, they are the supreme religion. That's it. And if you don't submit to it, you can lose your life. And a lot of people did. It's quite simple. That was easy.
Tell me what?
in my opinion, the way I see things, I want to say that I'm not optimistic at all. I think that the Jewish question in the Middle East will be resolved violently, unfortunately. And it is not, this is what I say, it is not our choice. It is not the Jewish people's choice, but it is a thing that is going to be forced upon them by the Muslim people. I was exchanging letters with Amos Shoken. Amos Shoken is the owner of Haaretz. Haaretz it is a very respected newspaper, but extreme left. And I decided to drop my subscription on a newspaper, and he started to correspond with me, and we went back and forth. And we began to speak about transfer this, transfer that, and I said, how come you're willing to transfer Jews and not Arabs and all this? And in the end, I said, in the end, what you think and what I think will turn out to be irrelevant, because the Arabs will bring upon themselves the second Nakba, the second Palestinian disaster. The first one was in 1948, where the first refugee problem was created to begin with. And it was the Arabs' fault. It is a clear-cut Arab fault. There was no Palestinians back then. But it was the Arabs' decision that brought upon themselves this disaster, and it's going to happen again, in my opinion. Although I think this time the Jews will suffer, I don't know to what degree, but I think it's not going to be pleasant. So I don't know what is going to happen. I just read an interview with a nameless Iraqi personage in the government, and he said that Iraq will not hesitate to use non-conventional weapons, just as it did with the war with Iran. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that fact, that Iraq used chemical and biological warfare against Iran. They did it. They don't have any inhibitations like the West has, and they will do it against Israel. They're working through a different set of worldview. They don't share our worldview. They don't share our things that we think should not be done. And so I think it will be. Now I don't know if it's going to be within the next 6 months or so. I think just as Israel is bound to operate in a certain way, so is the Americans. A lot of people can criticize the Americas, and you hear, this is the amazing thing. You see people in London and in New York and in Paris, you see good Christians and good Muslims are cooperating. It's beyond me. I cannot understand how these people can join hands in the same cause. They don't have the same cause, yet they do. So I think, despite of the European resentment to the Americans and their attempts to stop any American attack against Iraq or any other Muslim country for that matter, the Americans have to operate. They're bound to operate if they want to keep their country free. Do they have any other option? What are they going to do? They don't have any other option. They ran out of options. This is why they will have to act. And they're already acting. They act against Afghanistan, and they will act against Iraq, and maybe against Syria and Lebanon. Who knows? I don't know. Why? Because they have no other option. And Israel will find itself that it is running out of option again. Yeah. Yeah. In relation to Israel and the Jewish people, yeah. Because of the Holocaust. The Christian world changed its attitude toward the Jews after the Holocaust. The Holocaust is a turning point in in Christianity's history. It's very important to realize it. Yeah. Both. Well, yeah. Yes, but I know this is a different question. We can talk about it. Let me say this. I don't believe in the distinctions that politicians are doing, that they're distinguished between anti-Semitism and anti-Israelism. It's the same, because the people who live here are Jews, you know. And it's convenient, but it's not fair. Now, with it, I want to say that when I say that Christianity changed since 1945, Europe and the United States changed greatly, and the other Western countries, by a mass exit or exodus from religion. So countries that used to be religious up until 1945 are no longer so. And I think France and England are in that ballgame. They're not religious countries anymore. So although you call them Christians, I think it's more because of habit rather than reality. Because these countries abandoned their religion. The people of these countries abandoned their religion, and so what you find is that those who superficially Christians remains anti-Semitic. But those who have deep conviction about the Word of God are not so. You know, and you can find it in France, and you can find it in Germany, and you can find it in the United States, and you can find it all around the world, even in East Asia, like Korea and Japan. You know, it is very interesting, and we have to be acutely aware of it. They're not subtle anymore. You know, England. You know, there was a debate between David Watson and the Mufti of London. The Mufti is the religious high authority of London. And Watson said that he predicted within 15 years, England will turn into a Muslim country. And the Mufti of London said, I think you're missing you don't understand what is happening here. Not within 15 years, but within 5 years. You know. Now I don't know who's going to be right and who's going to be wrong, but the direction England is taking is clear. You know, and it is not only England. It is, I think Yaron was giving you some statistics last week. You know, it is something to be reckoned with, and the quicker the better. Because nothing is rational in this region. You know, don't try to find logic in things. Just accept them.